Welcome to Dr Joe Unplugged. The topics discussed in this podcast will reflect my opinions and are not in any way to be regarded as medical advice. It's almost become a cliche. What's the difference between a conspiracy theory and a fact? About 6 months and closing. January's been a real start the year with a bang month. We've seen two major developments on COVID, so if you're watching this on YouTube, you might find that it gets censored and bleeped. Consider going over to Spotify or Apple. We've seen the pardoning of Dr. Antony Fauci preemptively. I've not previously heard of a preemptive pardon for anybody. Obviously it exists, and I'm not sure that he and others who received them are the first. It raises the very, very obvious question, what is he being pardoned for? And it was a blanket pardon going back to 2014. So any act that he could be prosecuted for over the last 10 years, he's already been pardoned for. Now, there is a line that says you shouldn't have to worry if you haven't done anything wrong. I'm not sure that that always holds, because we see a lot of people prosecuted who haven't done anything wrong, and yes, they may end up being found guilty, but the process does become the punishment, and we see that in a number of different genres, and particularly with tribunals rather than courts of law. Can happen in both. And, we also know that there are times when the innocent do get found guilty wrongly and end up being penalised, and sometimes that get overturned. So pardoning people who have been found guilty, if it's felt that they've either served enough time or maybe it was felt that they were wrongly convicted, again, this can certainly be justified. But preemptive raises the very, very big question, why did Dr. Antony Fauci need to be pardoned? What has he done that might prompt an investigation? So the official version is that he'll be prosecuted because of political reasons. I don't actually buy that. Some of you may, and obviously you're entitled to your opinions, and that's fair enough, but I don't actually buy that. The other development, and I'll come back in a moment, the other development was the CIA conceding officially that the virus came from a lab. Now, I think a lot of people have known that for quite a while, because when you think about it logically, you've got a virology lab in Wuhan, you have a virus that starts in Wuhan. So these lines that it came from a bat or a pangolin or a wet market were always a cover-up. Why was there a cover-up? In the Obama administration, gain of function research was banned by President Obama. It was a directive. It is claimed, and I have no reason to doubt this, but I haven't seen the documentation, but I have no reason to doubt it. I've seen enough pieces online about this from a number of different sources, and it's all there, it's hiding in plain sight, that Dr. Antony Fauci circumvented that rule by funding the EcoHealth Alliance, and in turn the EcoHealth Alliance funded gain-of-function research at the Wuhan laboratory. And in February of 2020, when the virus was first emerging, as it was becoming better known worldwide and was spreading quite rapidly, originally a number of scientists and virologists were very concerned that it had come from the lab and said as much, and leaked emails have shown that there was a concerted campaign by Fauci and Francis Collins to suppress that view. And they went as far as essentially calling it a conspiracy theory, and anybody who suggested that it came from a lab was censored. People had their Facebook accounts cancelled or suspended. You weren't allowed to even suggest that that was a possibility. The WHO got involved. Who sort of influences the WHO? Well, it's the CCP. Now, why would Dr. Antony Fauci have gone to these lengths? And we know that there was a paper, the natural causes paper, that was published, that was put together very, very quickly to say that it came from animal sources, zoological as it's more technically known. to essentially kibosh the idea that it came from a lab. And what was he so worried about? I think we can answer that question. He was worried that his fingerprints were somehow on it. Now, maybe they weren't, but if we don't have an inquiry, we'll never know. That he's been pardoned, as I'm given to understand, doesn't mean that Congress can't continue to investigate, and he could well be called in front of Congress. And I also heard one commentator say that a federal pardon doesn't mean that individual states can't pursue investigations. And the world needs to know, let alone the American people, but the world needs to know. So hopefully we will get further information. Now, I also get that it is 5 years on and people are wanting to move on with their lives and not rehash COVID, and I get it, and I'm sort of, somewhat in the same boat. But we know that if we don't learn from history, that we can repeat it. So it's not necessarily just about going back and pointing the finger at certain groups. I think there should be accountability. The WHO needs to be held accountable. The CCP, that'll never happen, but they need to be accountable. And if there are certain individuals and agencies who either knew that it came from the lab or funded gain-of-function research directly or indirectly in defiance of the laws and rules or edicts, whichever term you like to use, set down by President Obama, then those people need to be held accountable. There is a lot of damage that has occurred, a lot of lives have been lost, and on top of that, a lot of morbidity in terms of mental health illness, delay in cancer diagnosis, and you know all this. And that people weren't allowed to ask simple questions or express opinions is a massive issue as well. Science, and all these people said, believe the science. Fauci said he was Mr. Science. Science advances by questioning what we currently believe. If we didn't question that the world was flat, we'd still think the world was flat. So it's interesting that effectively in the same week, the CIA has made the concession and Fauci got a pardon. Maybe it's coincidental. But the interesting news, if you like, doesn't stop there. Obviously, we've seen in the United States a presidential executive order stopping puberty blockers and transition surgery for people under the age of 18. We've seen in Queensland, Australia, the government put a pause whilst an inquiry is held. Inquiries need to be held. It's interesting to see the reaction of people who are outraged by this. Normally these people are very, very strong of we need to believe the science. But as soon as it's, well, can we question what you're doing? Can we see your data? Can you explain yourselves? No, can't do that. I think the proverbial worm is turning, and I would certainly encourage listeners to listen to Michael Schellenberger on his Substack Public. He's gone into this in some detail, and his group were behind the WPATH files, which again, through leaked emails, whistleblowers, and delving into actual data rather than propaganda, identified that the basis of transgender care that has been pushed out by this group called WPATH and its affiliates and associates is really built on nothing. The evidence is not there. If it is, fine, good. Let's see it. Let's expose it to daylight. But the work done by Schellenberger and his associates and by the Cass review in the UK has shown that the evidence isn't there. So we need to be doing the best for children with mental health problems, and whether or not offering them puberty blockers and life-changing surgery is the best, and are they being correctly diagnosed, are comorbidities such as autism, Asperger's, anxiety, there's a whole host of issues that affect teenagers, are they being overlooked? Again, these are questions. I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but it does need to be looked at, and that this can all be done without the consent of parents is also a massive issue. I have never seen or read of or heard of a person with anorexia nervosa, which is a serious condition where people don't eat, but people believe they are overweight. I've never heard or come across a person with that being affirmed that they are overweight and therefore being offered bariatric surgery. It doesn't happen. They are told they've got a problem, they need help. That is absolutely correct. It's only this one area where the individual is affirmed in what they believe without any questioning or any consideration of another diagnosis. And that goes against all the usual, if you like, principles of medicine, where we consider differential diagnoses and consider a variety or options of treatment. So we live in interesting times. It's an old saying that when you live in interesting times, remember they've always been interesting times, and I'm quite sure that is the case for people who've lived in previous generations and previous centuries. But there seems to be something in the air in 2025 in terms of change in how things have been done, and particularly how certain actions have been taken in medical practice, and how certain ideologies have come to dominate, and how questions are not allowed to be asked. I think what we've seen so far this year, and this is just recorded at the end of January, it's been a fairly big month for upending unquestioning belief in dogma. And that's a good thing. Let's see what happens through the rest of the year. Thanks for listening to Dr. Joe Unplugged. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, share, and consider subscribing. Tell your friends. If there are topics you'd like to see covered, be in touch through the chat or email info@drjoe.net.au. We'll be uploading new content each Monday, and soon we'll be putting these videos out on X. You can follow me there at Dr. Joe's DIY Health.